Hey guys, Mrhappy here, and today I want to do a video about two of Summoner's damage-dealing pets, Ifrit-egi and Garuda-egi. Sorry Titan, you'll have to sit this one out. Each Eggy is a different kind of damage dealer that the Summoner can bring out to help them in battle. The question is though, are both of these Eggys equal, or does one truly shine over the other? This test here is to find exactly this out. But first, let's get out of the way what they have in common. So, they both take reduced AoE damage. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it's very reduced, but it's there. They both benefit from the gear that the summoner was wearing upon summoning them. Remember that if you summon a pet while wearing less gear, it will take less of your stats than if you were wearing other gear. Buffs and items like potions don't affect this at all. They can both critically strike. Both Ifrit and Garuda are both capable of critically striking. They both cost 532 MP to summon, and they can both be healed with AoE heals such as Medica and Medica 2. Some of that's not really important to testing, but since we are talking about how equal the pets are or how unequal they are, it's important to note things like that. So, first, let's go over Ifrit-egi. Ifrit-egi is obtained at level 30 upon unlocking the Summoner job, and he's the first real Eggy that you will get to use. He's a melee fighter that deals primarily physical damage. So Ifrit's first move is Burning Strike, which deals 120 potency physical damage every 3 seconds while Ifrit is attacking. He'll just use this move whenever it comes off cooldown, really. His next move is Crimson Cyclone, a short duration stun that deals 105 potency and sits on a 40-second cooldown. This move in itself is a bit of a risk taker because you shouldn't use it on bosses that build stun resistance and that you will need to stun them. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about using Ifrit over Garuda on certain fights. Like, I wouldn't use Ifrit on Ifrit just because of this move. Ifrit's third move is Radiant Shield, which causes Ifrit to counter any physical damage received with a 50 potency physical attack. Ifrit very rarely gets hit in a raid scenario, so this is really negligible for the time being. And his fourth move is called Flaming Crush, which is a small range AoE that deals 105 potency to any enemies around Ifrit at the time. It only has a 30-second cooldown, so he can do it pretty often. Ifrit's Enkindle, which is his ultimate move, is Inferno, which deals 200 fire damage in a cone in front of Ifrit, as well as 20 potency fire damage over time for 15 seconds, equating to about 300 fire potency damage over the entire Enkindle. This is Ifrit's only attack that deals magical damage. Additionally, Ifrit also auto-attacks for 60 potency every 2.5 seconds. So now that we've gotten all of Ifrit's tools out of the way, let's move over to Garuda-egi. Garuda-egi is obtained significantly later at level 45 and replaces Emerald Carbuncle when you use the Summon 1 spell. A caster that deals entirely magical damage, Garuda can pretty much hit a target from anywhere in the arena. So Garuda's first move is called Windblade, which is a 100 potency nuke that Garuda will cast every 3 seconds. It's got a short 1-second cast time, meaning it can be interrupted, but it's highly unlikely. Her second move is Shockwave, which is a melee range nuke that deals 90 potency and knocks a target back 15 yalms. This spell is a long recast in 90 seconds, and the only way to benefit from it on a boss is if they can't be knocked back, and if you put Garuda in melee range, which gives her the same sort of vulnerabilities as Ifrit. Garuda's next move is Areal Slash, which is a nuke that deals 90 potency damage to a target and all enemies within a short range of that target. This spell has a long cast time of 3 seconds and has a 30-second recast timer, so this one's more likely to be interrupted. Still, considering Garuda doesn't become the target of spells all that often, it's extremely unlikely that even with that long cast time that she will be interrupted. Garuda's fourth and most popular move is called Contagion. This spell deals no damage by itself, but it extends the duration of all of the master's current dots on a target by 15 seconds. This can open up a lot of windows to cast other spells or just be lazy, and we're going to be going over those opportunities in a little bit. And finally, Garuda's Enkindle is Areal Blast, which is just a 250 potency nuke that deals damage to a target and all enemies within a short range of that target. So now that you've seen the tools that each Eggy has, how do they stack up against one another? Well, first, let's just get this out of the way. Ifrit is way more likely to die in melee range than Garuda is at ranged. Garuda can be placed at odd places in the arena to help her avoid deadly ranged mechanics, while Ifrit is pretty much going to be forced to eat any attack in melee range, since the summoner would lose far too much damage, taking the time to reposition him every time it's coming out. A summoner could simply heal him out of melee range, and then let him go back in naturally when you start attacking again, but you still can't be casting spells when you command a pet to heal, so this still wouldn't really work. You'd still lose a lot of damage as a summoner. So, but one thing that really wasn't hard to see is assuming that he stays alive, Ifrit was clearly dealing higher potency attacks than Garuda was. On average, Ifrit was dealing 15 to 20 more potency per each one of his basic abilities, and additionally, Ifrit was auto-attacking for an additional 60 potency, something Garuda can't do. Seeing just those raw numbers, one would assume he immediately just dealt more damage than Garuda, right? Well, there's one thing you have to take into account here is Garuda's Contagion. Now, I mentioned before, it doesn't directly do any damage, but it extends the duration of all the dots you have placed on a single target, and it can be used once per minute. It gives you a 15-second window of spare time that you didn't have before if you used Ifrit or Titan. So, how much extra damage do you really gain from that 15-second window where your dots are extended? Well, first, let's accredit Garuda to those 15 seconds of dot timers. Let's give her the amount of damage that you would have accrued over that 15 seconds. So, how much damage is that? Well, since you can only do Contagion once per minute, Garuda gains approximately 725 damage per minute in her calculations. This is assuming that the summoner has Bio 2, Miasma, Thunder, and Bio all on the target. And since it's multiplied by 5, it's 145 is the total potency of those 4 spells per tick, plus times 5, because 15 seconds is about the time it will take to do 5 ticks of damage over time. Additionally, Contagion frees up the caster to use other global cooldowns. Assuming a summoner is using Thunder, Contagion opens up the opportunity to cast 4 additional ruins at 80 potency each. This was calculated by noticing that in those 15 seconds, you will likely cast 6 spells. Without Contagion, during those 6 spells, 4 of them would have been the reapplication of your dots, but the final 2 would have likely been ruins. So it is estimated that you gain approximately 4 ruin casts from Contagion as well, meaning it adds up to another 320 potency that can be attributed to Garuda and Contagion, bringing its total up to 1045 damage per minute. Whoa, that's a lot of damage for one ability that Garuda has, especially when you start looking at all of Ifrit's abilities, right? Well, now that we've gone through that type of benefits and damage that Contagion seems, it almost seems like Garuda's the clear winner here. But let's hold on for a second, because there's one thing that we're forgetting. Ifrit does an additional 60 potency every 2.5 seconds on top of his abilities already dealing more damage. This means that he deals an additional 24 auto attacks per minute at 60 potency each, totaling 1,440 potency. On top of the fact that then all of his other abilities deal more damage than Garuda's at base, it still seems like he deals more potency per minute. On top of that, Ifrit also hits 24 more times per minute, which means he has 24 more chances to crit per minute. This makes him more likely to trigger the summoner's passive trait Enhanced Pet Actions, which is a 20% chance of triggering whenever your pet crits, and adds a 20% spell speed buff to the summoner for a short time. So really, let's get down to the results. Which Eggy deals more damage with all tools considered? Well, I did a quick calculation based on a 5-minute period where the Eggies alone would be attributed a portion of damage during the fight. A few rules were in place for this. Cooldowns were to be used as soon as they were available and not saving them for any particular reason. This includes Rouse, Spur, Raging Strikes, and Enkindle. Now keep in mind, Raging Strikes only affects Garuda because it only affects the dots that you do. So, for example, it only adds damage in the 15-second window where Contagion is extending your dots, since Raging Strike cannot affect your summoned pet's damage. Hopefully that's clear. It was assumed that the pets would have optimal fighting conditions during this test, including the targets being attackable the entire time, the pet surviving, and the optimal use of all of their abilities. Assuming no crits or misses for both Eggies, it would have thrown so many technical difficulties into this problem. They have the same crit chance, they have the same miss chance. However, they do also have a difference between the auto attacks that Ifrit would get, and then we'd have to calculate the 20% chance. It's bad. Just no crits, no misses. Raw damage. We'll look at that. Now, Thunder is in the rotation to calculate Contagion's true maximum DPS increase. So, even though Thunder is not always an optimal spell to use on Summoner, in this case we are going to include it for testing purposes. Next, Enkindle can only be used once during the fight entirely, and I know that seems odd considering it's a 5-minute fight and the ability has a 5-minute cooldown, but since in order to cast it twice during the fight, it would literally, the test would need to begin after you casted your first Enkindle, and then it would need to be the very last spell that you casted. Not to mention, it's only a few hundred damage, so it's not going to make or break them, considering the difference between the two is only 50 plus any buffs that they may have, such as Rouse or Spur. And finally, we assume that neither Eggy was being hit at all, thus Radiant Shield from Ifrit would yield 0 damage during this test. The results were that Ifrit dealt approximately 26,000 potency over the 5-minute time, while Garuda dealt about 19,800, very close to 20,000 potency damage over this time. So that is a huge difference. That puts Ifrit thousands upon thousands ahead of Garuda. Now, it seems that Ifrit is back to being number 1 with that test, right? But there is one factor present that separates the two, one that can't be calculated without active testing on enemies. That factor is defense. After testing on several different monsters, I soon found that all monsters in the game, unless explicitly stated otherwise or meeting certain fight requirements, have a higher base defense than magic defense. While I only show a few here, I tested this at a number of level ranges and enemy types and always came up with the same results. Ifrit's 120 potency burning strikes would, on average, deal 120 damage. Meanwhile, Garuda's Windblade would on average deal 170 damage despite it only having a 100 potency. This was even the case on things such as Titan and Garuda, the bosses. So what does this mean in the end? It means that damage-wise, they're both nearly equal. However, I have to pick a winner here, so I'm going to go ahead and give the matchup to Garuda-egi. Ifrit's auto attacks just barely make up for the damage difference between Ifrit's spells and Garuda's spells, and in the end, all they do is provide a higher likelihood that enhanced pet actions will trigger. If you're interested in testing the damage that the summoner gains from the added chances, feel free. Just remember that you need to put it up against the one ability that won Garuda this matchup, Contagion. Not only does this move grant you the ability to cast more ruins per minute, but it also frees up the summoner to move around without fear of their dots falling off for a longer period of time. Just be sure all your dots are up before triggering this spell, and the ruin spam will come shortly after. Now, don't get me wrong, Ifrit is still very viable if you decide to use him, though I find that he is far more effective in a melee-heavy composition. Ifrit's melee attacks deal all 3 types of damage, blunt, slashing, and piercing, which means he benefits from the resistance-reducing abilities such as Dragon Kick, Disembowel, and Storm's Eye. If all 3 of them are up on a target, Ifrit will then begin to far outparse Garuda in optimal situations. But that's a very specific thing that needs to be done in order for Ifrit to stand up. So my say is that Garuda stays at ranged, less likely to die, helps the summoner be more mobile, and overall just the easier pet to manage. So my say is go with Garuda unless you really want to prove that Ifrit's got what it takes as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, favorite, subscribe, and share for more Final Fantasy XIV information. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter if you have any sort of number crunching you'd like to do, anything you'd like to share, or any questions you'd like to ask. Those are the places to reach me. I have a much easier time getting back to people on Facebook and Twitter than I do on YouTube. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching so much. Until next time, take care.